All right, welcome in to another Check the Mic NFL Draft Special. Today, our guest, Kyle Krabs, the NFL Draft lead at the 33rd team. Kyle, thanks for joining us.
Steve, excited to be on. I got big shoes to fill. I know we teased in the pre-show with Mike last week, but we'll do what we can here. It's the wordplay is not there with the name Mike and Check the Mic, but so I'm already in a hole, so I'll see if I can dig myself out.
Well, we got this, Kyle. We got this, man.
All right, cool.
This is going to be fun. For those who missed it last week, it was our first draft episode. My goal is to have a bunch of draft experts on here at this point during the fall, highlighting some key players that maybe we haven't heard about yet, get an early QB ranking, even though we have, about half the college football season to go. So we'll get through all that. We'll talk about your mock draft in a little bit and answer some questions. So let's start with the QBs. We did a little countdown last week as far as the top 5 goes. So you've got your big board over at the 33rdteam.com, so people can check that out and kind of follow along. But let's go through the QBs. Who's your QB 5 right now as far as the NFL draft goes?
Yeah, so my QB 5 right now is one of the guys who's really, I felt, made a leap thus far this year, and that's Jalen Milroe from the University of Alabama. Obviously, the raw physical tools have been apparent since he stepped on the field, but you do feel like you've started to see him be a little bit more consistent, managing the rush, avoiding negative plays, and just the ability to access all levels of the field and what you can do in the quarterback run game, where that is such a big piece of the debate right now in the league, right? It is the value of the run game and outside of structure stuff, and he can give you all of that. And I think the fact that he does that and he's being more consistent as a passer this year really bodes well for him. And as you forecast him, while acknowledging there's still a lot of growth that can take place for him.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this last week when Renner didn't have Milroe in his top 5, but, a lot of people talking about Milroe, some people talking about him high end in round 1. And I think I had mentioned, man, if you told me this a year ago or 2 years ago, and I struggle with that sometimes, Kyle, as an evaluator. I struggle with, here's my initial impression, and then all of a sudden you see that growth, and how do you weigh the growth? But you've seen it with Milroe, and you mentioned with the QB run game, we're coming off of just last week, a guy like Justin Fields doesn't have a good game passing, but he's got some key plays with his legs when the offensive line breaks down, still picking up first downs, finds the end zone twice. Milroe has some special running ability as he's developing as a passer, which, again, as you mentioned, he's already shown some this year.
Yeah, I think that Justin Fields archetype is really where I think the floor is for Milroe as a player, too. I think maybe there were higher expectations for Fields when he came out of Ohio State, but the player he's proven to be in the NFL, I think Milroe can give you a lot of the same kinds of things, and that will be a good kind of parallel to point to when we get into some of the mock draft conversation.
All right, how about QB4 right now?
QB4 for me, he didn't play very well this past weekend, but he made the plays down the stretch needed to win the game. It's Garrett Nussmeier from LSU. I'm really enamored by what he's shown. And you talk about small sample sizes. I think he came into the year with about 200 career pass attempts and backed up Jaden Daniels this past year. And he's working with a little bit more of a limited supporting cast. I know Mason Taylor at tight end's a good receiving player. Kyron Lacey has good physical skills, but you look at some of the top quarterbacks and guys that they have to throw the ball to. I think Nussmeier does carry a little bit more of that load. The negative plays, the decision-making, it's still, you feel like he's learning as he goes as far as what you can and can't get away with, because he doesn't have the raw physical skills of some of the other quarterbacks that are eligible in this year's class. But he's just really smooth, and he showed up in more than one game this year to dig this team out of holes and making big-time throws in the process of doing so.
Man, that game winner just last week,
yeah.
We're trying to make this evergreen, right? People might watch this in a couple months, but we're coming off the Ole Miss comeback from LSU. The anticipation on 4th down to be able to hit that game-winning or game-tying touchdown, unbelievable by Nussmeier.
And even the extended play that he hit to Taylor, where it looked like he might have not been down and kept his knee up and ran it in. That was another 4th down, like extended play in the backfield type of play. So those two plays, the decision making to put yourself in the hole is not great, but he pulled a couple rabbits out of his hat there at the end.
He's been up and down for sure, but it does feel like Nussmeier is the guy that a lot of analysts are starting to jump in and say pocket movement, anticipation, thrown to a spot, maybe making up for not having a cannon for an arm with some other QB traits are really standing out. So says a lot. I can't wait to see what he does the rest of the year for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
How about QB3 for you, Kyle?
QB3 for me is Shedeur Sanders. I think you watch him play, and the word that comes to mind to describe him the most for me is just fluid. He's very fluid with his throwing motion. He's fluid with how he gets off his spot. Do I wish he played like he knew he was not the best athlete at quarterback sometimes? Yeah, but that's a gene that a lot of the great quarterbacks do have, is that desire to make things happen. And sometimes you do make things happen out of nothing, and other times you take sacks at a little bit of a higher level. And I think that's just always going to be something that you have to live with Shedeur. But I've been really impressed by the way that he stabilized his play this year after starting hot last season at Colorado, and the way things tailed off down the stretch. He's done much better this year, playing at a more consistent basis, down in and down out. I think that the concern there, like with Nussmeier, is I don't think he has the best arm. He's not a particularly standout athlete at the position. I don't think he's overly quick twitch, but you could tell that he came up in football, I think, with the way that his vision works and the way that he sees things and the way he plays the position.
Yeah, I think he works through progressions and just runs the offense extremely well. So second straight analyst here, Renner last week, you this week, kind of bringing up, okay, it's not a special arm.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's not necessarily below average or downgrade for you, right? But it's just not what we're talking about as far as some of the other top prospects. Is that right?
It will meet baselines for all 32 teams and any kind of system that you can want to run. I think he can hit the vast majority of throws. Is he going to be a dead sprint throwing on a rope with a ton of velocity 40 yards downfield? He hit a Hail Mary throw like that at the end of the Baylor game, but it wasn't like it really popped. It was a good ball adjustment and good placement, and they did a good job of leveraging Travis Hunter and the attention that he received to kind of get a one-on-one situation. So I think he's going to meet all the baselines, but just the raw ability, I think, versus some of the upper echelon players of the position, it's not on that level.
All right, let's get to QB2 here for you, Kyle.
So I'm still willing to die on the Carson Beck hill. I have him at number 2. I actually think the past couple of weeks he's made a lot more of the impressive type of throws after that rough first half against Alabama. Obviously, he helps pull them all the way back. It kind of just felt like you got the halftime of that game. He's like, you know what? We're going to have to cut some tight window throws down the field loose if we're going to make this thing happen. And he did. And unfortunately, at the end of the game, his receiver doesn't make a great adjustment. You could get into kind of situationally that throw at that point in the game. And they end up losing that football game. But I think I get the sense that he's starting to get acclimated to playing without Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey as the two players that he really featured in that passing offense last year. And I'm kind of hopeful that what we continue to see with him is that he continues to play at the little bit of a higher level. He embraces that guys aren't going to be so open, but he's somebody who gets rave reviews for getting up to the line of scrimmage and that control at the line of scrimmage. I think he's probably a little bit more twitchy than what Shedeur is. I don't think he has the biggest arm either, but it's somebody that I think when you cross-reference the tools with the reputation that he has with being at the line of scrimmage and working the line of scrimmage, that's where I get really excited about the translatability of his play.
It seems like the knock on Beck is that he doesn't do anything special, or you don't have a whole lot of special moments. You mentioned Shedeur's Hail Mary and a couple other moments in there. Does Carson Beck not have enough special moments or carry the team moments or special traits that stand out? It seems like that's been the knock on him to this point.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question as far as like the analogy of trucks and trailers at the position. And I do think that, and I feel this for the vast majority of the class, I don't think there's a lot of transcendent players in this year's class that are eligible at quarterback where you can put them in any situation and they're going to change the DNA of the offense. I do think like a lot of these guys, the fit and the staff and the supporting cast and their offensive lines and the ability to run the ball, like all of that, I think matters for the vast majority of them. And I think for Beck, I think why he's so well represented in my ranks is I feel pretty good about the floor. I think it's fair to question the ceiling about upper middle class type of NFL quarterback. And is that good enough? And do you want to use a top 15 type pick on that kind of player? And I get that. But I'm pretty comfortable with what I think he brings to the table to give you consistent quarterback play on a year in, year out basis.
All right. Who's the top quarterback in the draft right now? And do you think this is up in the air? Like, is this locked in right now here in the fall? Or, how much can this change? Who's QB1?
Yeah, it's Cam Ward from University of Miami for me, just the way he's played. And I had a chance to meet Cam Ward at one of Steve Clarkson's summits when he was first coming to Washington State, and had a chance to get to know him a little bit. So he's been somebody I've been watching closely because he stood out to me in that setting. And you finally see him starting to stop shooting himself in the foot and let all the raw throwing talent really take over. Do I think it's open and shut, slam dunk? No, because I do think his body of work as a whole in college, you do have a lot of minus plays and unnecessary risks and the gunslinger element of flying too close to the sun and getting burned by it. And I think that needs to make sure it stays off his resume for the back half of the season if he is going to come in at QB1.
Something to keep an eye on. We had pick 6 against Cal, throwing back. They're not just like, hey, I misread a linebacker. This is like, this worked one time, throwing back across my body. I'm going to try it again. Oh no, there's a safety there. There's a linebacker there. This is Josh Allen type of stuff, right? I mean, look, and Josh Allen has enough special. I'm not comparing their tools, but Josh Allen has enough special in his arsenal that it's like, all right, that boneheaded decision, we can live with that, or several of those, because you make so many special plays. That's going to be the tough balance, I think, for Cam Ward, both now in college and then projecting him to the NFL.
Yeah, and I don't think he is on that Josh Allen level of just raw arm strength that exists. So it's a good thing to point out. And for Cam, I think the other thing that I feel good about is how little he's influenced by pressure. He understands where pressure's at. He feels bodies around him. The pocket awareness is there. But him getting off his spot is so smooth, and you could tell he's unbothered by it. And like it never feels like it's happening fast in those moments. So then it just becomes play with some discipline. And I think that's half the battle. Is it's not overwhelmed making bad decisions, it's getting greedy making bad decisions at times for Cam.
I'm so impressed with how he bounces back from those, though. He does not. He really doesn't let those compound, and he does a really nice job there. I want to touch on some other names that maybe don't make your top 5 or that you're still watching for that, obviously can move halfway through the season here. But high level, I should have started with this. You mentioned it a little bit. Where is this QB class? How would you compare it? How many first rounders, and just how good do you feel about the class as a whole?
I think if all the guys played strong, 5 is probably where I would say the ceiling is for guys that could get a call in the first round. The probability of that happening is probably pretty slim because I do think there's significant holes that you can punch in most of their resumes. I don't think it's a bad quarterback. I don't think it's the Malik Willis, Kenny Pickett, Matt Corral type of class. I don't know that it's going to be the 2020 class where you get all this production and a bunch of quality starters at the NFL level, but some of that also depends on the teams and what they do once they get their hands on these guys too. But I like this class. I think it's really intriguing, and I think there's guys that give you options depending on what kind of brand of football you want to play.
All right, so who are the names maybe missing the top 5 or guys that could crack the top 5 by the end of the year?
Yeah, Drew Allar from Penn State has definitely made some big leaps in his game. Just watching for if you're not catching this in real time, they just got done playing the game in USC with the big comeback win and made a couple of really impressive throws in that game. And he's kind of the first of the prototype pocket passers, but he's not a total statue. I just don't think extended plays is really a great element of his game, but it was the consistency of routine throws, I think, was the thing for me that had him starting in such a hole at the beginning of the season, where you look back on the 2023 tape and missing throws that you really shouldn't miss if you're going to be in that stratosphere. He's been much better with it. I know the offensive scheme change has been helpful for them, but he's kind of the first one off that I wouldn't put outside the realm of possibility of potentially jumping up and passing one of the guys in the top 5.
All right, I want to transition to sleepers or players that you're high on. So I'm just going to set you up for this because I've seen the list. Yeah. All right, just to give it away. I've seen the list. Another QB on the list for you, sleeper or guy you're higher on, Kurtis Rourke from Indiana. As we speak right now, Indiana undefeated. Kurtis Rourke, been one of the best quarterbacks in the nation.
Yeah, I think it is worth disclosing for the ageists out there. He will be a 25-year-old rookie in October. So you put a certain ceiling on what the draft stock of that means. But I've been really impressed with Kurtis when you look at the entirety of his body work. You can go back to Ohio, right? He's played at Ohio for a bunch of years, transferred to Indiana. The level of competition hasn't been too big for him. But he has been really effective in navigating pressure and plays in which he's pressured, whether it's third down, third and long, in the red zone, total body of work. Going back to the start of the 2023 season, amongst like the top 12 eligible quarterbacks as far as like consensus guys in this year's class, he's in the top 3 in all of those measures. And you can see his ability to get off the spot and move. So he's for prototype guy, he's 6'5", 230 pounds. He can get off the spot. He can run. He can use his legs. He shows some really nice touch throws over the middle of the field. He's got some anticipation throws to the sideline to get balls out when he's got a free runner coming in his face. Like, you see flashes of all this stuff that's NFL level quarterback play. And now the consistency of it and the age and the path that he's taken, there's going to be a limit on where teams are going to be comfortable taking him. But that's a guy, if you want a developmental type, I think he's got some really nice tools to work with.
To be clear on the age stuff, I feel like I clarify this every year. I don't think it matters that like his 5th year in the NFL, he'll be 30 or 31. I don't think that part matters. We see multiple quarterbacks get better in their 30s and peak there. It's more so like as you're evaluating him right now in college, he's a man playing with boys, right? He's a man playing. So that's where it's like, how well is he doing right now when he should be in maybe year 2, 3, or 4 in the NFL? That's the bigger issue, I think, with age. Not so much will he develop, right? And then, Brandon Weeden was 28, and that's just a whole different animal when he got drafted.
And just to build on that too, Steve, is Kurtis has over 1,100 career attempts in college at this point. So it's that you should be close to the ceiling. It's kind of the Bo Nix dynamic of you started 60 games in college, right? Like, how much better can you get? I think that's a fair question to ask too.
So it's not the fact that he's going to be old. It's just ceiling development. Has he maxed that part out? All right, who else do you have? We're calling them sleepers, but these could be guys that are first rounders. Maybe they're mid rounders, but guys that you're generally higher on in the draft.
I kind of stuck closer to guys that I think have a chance to compete for day 2 as far as qualifying names here. I really like what Jay Higgins, the linebacker from Iowa, has done this season. A lot of ball production this year. When you're talking about off-ball linebackers and the value of that position, I understand it's a position that teams generally don't prioritize, and the ability to find guys to chase down the ball, and you're protected by the guys in front of you. If you're a gap control scheme, they're dependent on a lot of things around them. But once you start making splash plays and having interceptions, and he's had a couple like really nice reads in zone coverage and mirroring and feeling routes developing behind him. And he's got this high motor chase down against Ohio State for a punch out for a forced fumble. That kind of stuff has started coming for him this year. He's 6 foot, 230. He's not the biggest guy, but he's fluid. He's got loose hips. And I actually kind of like the fact that he's 6 foot because it's lower to the ground center of gravity. And I think that shows up with some of his change of direction stuff when he's decisive, or when he wants to say, hey, I got to stick my pads in here and get underneath somebody and get under their block and really kind of hold first contact.
I hate myself for doing this. I'm usually anti-tackle stats. Hate the tackle stats. Never use tackle stats.
Try not to talk about tackles.
I mean, I think, but he unofficially had like 170 last year for Iowa. I mean, he is just that, to me, like really sure tackling, always in the right place at the right time. And there's something like Iowa players, they play so much zone, whether it's a nickel corner coming out of Iowa, an outside corner coming out of Iowa, a linebacker, what you mentioned, they understand route concepts. They understand how to be in position with so much zone coverage being played in the NFL and pattern matching and all that. I do feel like the Iowa players have a huge advantage coming out, and Higgins has been fantastic these last couple of years.
Yeah, and it felt like he really took the leap in 2023 and then found a whole nother gear again in 2024, was starting to make some of the ball production. I have a couple edge guys. The first one is Elijah Roberts from SMU. He's a transfer from the University of Miami, And what stands out to me about him is the last 4 games, really going back to the BYU game. They played BYU, TCU, Florida State, and Louisville. And SMU's a really hot team right now. He's been very disruptive up front. He's got a 22% pressure rate on third downs. He can line up over the tackle. He wins inside and can work across your face. He's very violent with the way that he plays. He's kind of got that higher priced recruit kind of build to him. He's got some length and density. So he's been a player who just, as you're watching SMU and you're asking yourself, man, like, who are the guys that are kind of serving as catalysts for this team this year to be such a tone-setting team playing these teams that have been in bigger platforms than them? He's been a guy who's popped at me pretty much every time they've been on TV.
He's listed at 6'4", 295. What do you think he actually is? Because he is playing on the edge and obviously a power player on the edge the way stylistically.
I think he's probably a little leaner than that now. He looks like he's probably 280. So I don't think he's showcasing 300-pound, and he's not somebody that I would forecast with a great deal of confidence to play in there at the next level if you wanted him to be more of a B-gap defender. But if you're looking for a base end, now he can rush from a 2-point stance and has some pretty good get-off that. But I think he's going to be best as a base end that maybe has somebody leveraged outside of him so you don't have to worry about playing outside contained so much and just really try to challenge offensive tackles and be able to squeeze and compress down inside against the run. And they've been really good in the twist game too. A lot of his pressures, they turn him loose as far as playing games inside, and he turns those corners really tight. He's got a good feel for it.
Who else did you have on the edge, did you say?
The other one that I had was Kyle Kennard, I guess I'd use air quotes here, other South Carolina, even though Dylan Stewart's just a freshman.
A freak freshman, Dylan Stewart, for those who don't know.
But Kennard's been really disruptive, and I like the growth that he's shown as a pass rusher this year. He's another one of those guys that has good numbers as far as on third downs. It's a 24% pressure rate on third downs this year, 18% on all pass rushes. He lacks the juice of Stewart, but the functional contact through like lateral pressure guys that try to ride him out, like he runs through that really well as a guy who isn't super built low to the ground. He's showcased some variety off the edge and the ability to convert speed to power. He's kind of got like this Euro chop step that he's flashed now and again. And that whole South Carolina front is really fun. And just because there's this presence of Stewart, I think he's getting overshadowed a little bit as a guy who I could see projecting into potentially a top 100 type selection when it's all said and done.
Kyle Kennard's, I think, going to be one of the more fascinating prospects during this entire cycle. 4 years at Georgia Tech with mediocre production and a massive breakout this year. Honestly, I mean, with his size and what he did to Will Campbell a few times at LSU, I could see people talking about him in the first round. I don't know if it's there yet, just because of the size, the length, and some of the plays he's put together and the week-to-week production. I would struggle with the lack of previous production, though, right? There's this balance of what have you done, full body of work, and like have you improved and turned a corner this year? I'm going to be interested to see, and I don't know about the athleticism either, as far as, you know, if that stacks up with some of the other top edges around the NFL. But man, he's been so impressive this year as a fifth-year breakout.
I think the concern would be if he ends up being like a slow burn guy with a 1.7 something 10-yard split and he runs in the 4.8s. He's going to have to test well, I think, to really get up into that top 50 stratosphere. But he's looked at times like a top 50 player on tape this year, to your point.
Yeah. All right, who else do you have? Last sleeper that you wanted to highlight here.
The last one I had was Jack Nelson, offensive tackle from Wisconsin. And we know all about the pollination of the Shanahan schemes across the league. And I think this is a guy that a lot of those schemes are going to like with what he brings in the run game. I think if you can reduce his time under tension in true pass sets as much as possible, and the Shanahan trees does a really good job of that with how they build their passing concepts off of play action passing and selling everything as the same until it's not through the first 2-3 steps of the rep. He gets a lot of movement. Like Wisconsin played Alabama this year, and Alabama smoked them. But some of the run game stuff that he was able to put on display in that game, Jack Nelson, you're not going to be concerned about the physicality. He's big. He's long. He's listed at 6'7", about 310 pounds. Pretty explosive coming off the ball. I think you do see some of the losses that he takes with his pass sets. There's been some times where it looks like they're expecting to have to pass off a twist, but then his feet get a little heavy and he has to try to flash and redirect outside. Like, that's just not bread and butter for him. But I think there's a lot of potential landing spots for him where he can be an impactful starting player in the NFL.
Another 6'7" Wisconsin tackle, 4-year starter. Here we go.
Right.
Love it. All right. So I'm crowdsourcing Travis Hunter opinions from everyone, and then we'll talk about your mock draft. But I mean, this is just one of the coolest draft stories. It's one of the coolest football stories of the last few years. We see what Shohei Ohtani is doing in baseball, literally playing 2 different positions at a high level. Travis Hunter's doing the same thing in college. Unfortunately, just got banged up last week against Kansas State. But where do you see Travis Hunter's NFL future, wide receiver, corner, hybrid? What are your thoughts?
I could see it going both ways. I think that the ceiling and the potential to be like a top of position player in the NFL is probably better at corner. I just think we talked about it with the Iowa defenders and playing with eyes in the backfield and processing things. That's where all of his most, I think, rare plays happen. And the breaks on the ball and the anticipation and understanding where he has help and leverage to be able to be aggressive and trigger on throws, and the transitional quickness in which he does it with ball skills of a wide receiver. Like, that to me really moves the needle the most. And, you know, I think if he fully invested there, I do think down the road, maybe you get some package stuff for him at wide receiver. So that's probably where I would want to see him go selfishly if I wanted to try to forecast where I think he'd be the best product in the NFL.
I'm landing in the same place, Kyle. I mean, I think I think I mentioned last week, he's the type of guy that could have one of those Xavier Howard 8 interception type of seasons. Doesn't happen every year. You need a little bit of luck, but he has that type of ball skills, right? So you have that year where he's turning it over like crazy, and then he's your wide receiver 3, maybe wide receiver 4. That's maximizing the value. I'm curious to know what he ends up wanting to do. Everybody's talking about the receiver money. Does he actually want to try to play full time? And I'm not going anywhere unless they let me play full time. That whole story is going to be fascinating, though.
Yeah, and he is one of the blue chip players in this class, and I don't think there's a ton of them, but a player like that, I think the floor is very high because he's going to provide you with value no matter what your situation is. Whether you need a corner, if you need a wide receiver, if you want to have just an elite player and draft based off best player available, I think that's why when you're trying to forecast like what his draft stock ultimately is going to be versus the top of the class, he gives you so many possible solutions, potentially multiple solutions within the same ecosystem, and you're really getting 54 roster spots because of he can do both of those things in the right setting. So I think if you're getting down to just like authentic value with a pick, he's going to be pretty hard to turn down at the very top in my mind.
It's a great point, and I actually haven't even thought about it through that lens. I keep thinking about what do I want to do with Travis Hunter, play him here, play him there. But as you mentioned, if you have a team that's depleted at receiver or depleted at corner, and he can literally step into either spot just based off in-season injury situation, that's fascinating. Like, we've never seen that. We've seen, like Bill Belichick pull Julian Edelman in to play nickel corner out of desperation, but this is literally Travis Hunter can cross-train and fill in either spot depending on where your roster is in a given spot. Or in year 3, all of a sudden just be like, oh, moving from corner to receiver because that's what the team needs. I love that as a potential option. Which brings me to your mock draft. And one of the questions from the Check the Bike Discord was about, can Travis Hunter be the number 1 overall pick? And you say yes, because you have him going number 1 overall to the New England Patriots right now in your latest mock.
Yeah, so for the Patriots, they've been trying to be active in the wide receiver market, and they just haven't had the allure for veterans as far as trying to get teams or a player interested to trade and get him in. So I do think you're probably going to be resided to having to go the youth route to get some impact players at the wide receiver position. I know they drafted a couple of guys in recent years, and there's some exciting athletic profiles there, but I don't think it would be anything like what Travis would bring at wide receiver. And then their cornerback situation, aside of Christian Gonzalez long term, not a lot of long-term contractual stability. You got guys that are getting up on the wrong side of 30 at that position, which is always kind of that uncomfortable biological clock for a corner. So it was kind of also the convenience of it doesn't matter where he plays for New England because I think he can provide an answer for him in either spot.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And look, mock drafts in mid-October, to me, it's less about where the team is picking and more about the fits. Mm-hmm. Which players you're highlighting going in the first. But yeah, you have players like Cam Ward going to the Panthers at 4, Carson Beck going to the Giants at 11. I think Shedeur Sanders a little bit higher than that, number 8 to the Raiders. What are there any QB fits that you really liked with some of these teams, or is this just kind of going by the way the board fell?
So I liked the Carson Beck pick at 11 to New York. Because I think if you're going to get the best of Carson Beck based off of what the narratives are around him right now, having like a bona fide player that can be a volume receiver and the Giants having that, or we believe they have that in Malik Neighbors, I think takes some of the guesswork out of that. But stylistically and like structure of offense perspective, I would say the last two were the ones that I was most excited about. I had Nussmeier going to the Dolphins at 12. There's obviously a whole lot of storylines with the Tagovailoa contract and injury history there. I would say the Dolphins did kind of build an escape hatch in that contract extension. His 2026 salary doesn't guarantee until March of next year. So do you take the bath on the 1-year salary and go a different direction? Nussmeier with the anticipation stuff over the middle, just like that 4th down throw to tie the game that you talked about. That's kind of where the Dolphins offense is bread and buttered. I think he gives you a little bit more as far as navigating and managing the pocket and getting outside the pocket athletically than Tua does. He gives you a little bit more arm strength than Tua does. So you're increasing in the margins in a couple spots with a guy whose strengths really mirror what we know the offense to be. And then the other one that I had was all the way down with Pittsburgh, where they drafted Jalen Milroe as their quarterback. And I thought that, as what we just talked about with Justin Fields and the archetype of player that he is, not having to make a long-term financial decision if you're Pittsburgh, getting the same kind of archetype of player that you've seen some success with and get him on a rookie contract kind of frees up Pittsburgh to go a lot of different ways as far as where they're investing elsewhere on their roster.
Fascinating one, because Pittsburgh, again, as we speak right now, sitting at 4-2, thinking about maybe going to Russell Wilson, spent pennies on the dollar at their quarterback position in what seemed like a transition year. And you transition into, maybe drafting a guy like Jalen Milroe and being able to use his legs the same way you would, current starter as of right now, Justin Fields. Yeah. So that answers another Discord question. Somebody's asking about where the Dolphins, how high can the Dolphins draft a quarterback? You're saying, hey, maybe round 1, the Nussmeier fit in Mike McDaniel's offense. But also, would you say the Dolphins are definitely going to be in the quarterback market? Are they evaluating quarterbacks right now? Because this is when you're doing it. This is when you're going to see players in person and everything. You have to have this anticipation. Do you anticipate the Dolphins having that expectation that they're taking a QB somewhat high?
I would say, based off of some of the conversations that I've had, I do a lot of Dolphins coverage and also from some people nationally that are in local places. I would say Miami is conveniently sniffing around at more than one program that has one of the higher rated quarterbacks in this year's class. So I don't know what that would look like from a front office. I mean, there were guys, the head coach and the executive both pounding the table to the owner to get this contract with Tua done. He promptly goes out in the second game and gets hurt and has to land on IR. And if you make that kind of decision, do you keep Tua and groom another player behind him that you're more comfortable with? Like there's a lot that has to get cleared up, but I would be pretty surprised. They've always been a team that overcorrects with issues. In 2022, it was cornerback, and then they kind of revamped that whole group. They brought in Jalen Ramsey. They draft Cam Smith. Then 2023, it was the edge group for them that really fell apart. So they draft Chop Robinson in the first round. They sign Shaq Barrett. Shaq Barrett retires before training camp even starts. They draft Muhammad Kamara.
They said, we will never go into a playoff game with the class of 2011 best edge rushers, Melvin Ingram and Justin Houston.
Right.
I know it's 2012 for Ingram, but either way, last decade.
They have always been, at least in the past couple of years, a team that overcorrects with whatever one of the fatal flaws is on the roster. And I don't know how you don't look at the quarterback play and how bad it has been without Tua and think that they will not overinvest and overcorrect, even if Tua is here beyond this season.
All right, a couple more players I wanted to discuss in the mock. Everybody should check it out, the33rdteam.com, Kyle Crabb's latest mock draft. Again, the team and the pick doesn't necessarily matter, but at number 5 overall to the Los Angeles Rams, Abdul Carter, the edge rusher out of Penn State, more of an official move from linebacker to the edge this year. Still not necessarily, you don't see him rush off the edge, 25, 30 times a game. Still a bit of a projection here. Do you think he can be a true edge at the next level?
I think you've started to see in the last couple of weeks more promising reps and flashes of it. But even if he is kind of a hybrid defensive weapon type of player, when you consider what the Rams have in the front with Verse and Fiske as guys that have really popped early on from this past year's class, and Colby Turner as a disruptive player, like I think they have enough core pieces that can be a destination where if he does have to do some more exotics and line up in interior gaps and maybe drop out, I think he's athletic enough that if you want to rush 4, but you want to disguise who's coming and you haven't walked up an interior gap and then he's got to get out to the flat or get out to a hook, he can do all that. And you see, I think the Illinois game is a really good showcase of just like him as like a shallow spy and his ability to trigger when the quarterback gets off his spot. And with some of the other penetration type players that they have, it was part of the process of why I like the fit with the Rams, because of what else they have in young talent there that can kind of, I see more pathways, more surefire pathways for him to be a player as compared to just, hey, you're going to line up and rush off the left tackle 35 times in this game.
I also feel obligated to ask the Ashton Jeanty question every single week now because he's so special as a running back prospect. How good is he as a running back prospect? And you have him going number 10 to the Saints here. How high do you think he ends up landing on draft night?
Man, I would be surprised if it really ends up being 10, but in the top 10, but he does have a few like footprint parallels with guys over the past 10 years that have landed in that stratosphere. I think you need a really unique team, and that's why with the mock, he ends up going to the Saints, that I can see being that kind of team. They haven't really shied away in the past from some aggressive ignoring of positional value. They've been a team that's been oriented towards winning. They could save $19 million by getting out of the Alvin Kamara contract this offseason for a team that's been in a constant churn with their salary cap situation for seemingly the past 5 years. So that transition feels like a no-brainer if they want to be a team that still is of the win now mentality. Like, I think that's part of it for Jeanty, because I think I'm going to have a hard time stacking up players and naming 10 players that are better at him at what he does in this draft class. It's just the need is going to need to be there. And I think based off maybe some of the lack of growth in some of the other premium positions, it may be a part of the recipe and how you get there too.
One other note from your mock that stood out to me: at 14, you had the Seahawks taking Will Campbell, the tackle out of LSU, but you said he projects best inside to guard. I haven't seen that a whole lot lately. Is that where you think Will Campbell's best fit actually is?
I think that's where the ceiling's highest for him. If you told me he long-term played at tackle, I could totally see why. I do think length is one of the questions that I have, and just kind of lateral foot speed. I think he's really good getting off the line. I think he's really good resetting in the point of attack. I think if you try to rush straight through him, you're going to have a hard time doing that. But I think he is a bit more of a power player who's not the longest. And when I combine those two things, I see a plug-and-play type situation for Seattle with how bad their interior spot situation is. You kind of have to figure out long-term what you're doing at right tackle with Abe Lucas. And so I know they have some instability there as far as not Charles Cross at the left tackle spot, but I could see enough different blends of opportunities that he could play right away and then maybe end up long-term landing in a tackle spot. But this tackle group in general, I think, is one of the big mysteries as we stand here in the middle of October, as far as, is anybody going to step up and take the mantle like definitively? Because I don't think that's necessarily happened yet. I know Campbell played well this past weekend, but just the entire body of work for each one of these guys, you're waiting for really somebody to command the title.
Yeah, that's one of the mailbag questions is about that. I just wanted to wrap this up by saying, hey, go check out the rest of the mock, the33rdteam.com, Kyle Crabb's most recent mock draft. Get a good feel for which players could land in the first round. You know, the back end of the first round is always fascinating to me during fall mock drafts because it's nothing set in stone, right? That could go any which way. So you get some interesting names always in the back end. But just to handle some of the mailbag questions from the Check the Mic Discord and from Twitter, I'll just jump to the Twitter question. Phil Mosier on Twitter asked which positions in the draft have the best depth and which ones are top heavy. You're just talking about tackle. That seems to be one of the themes here, that after last year, there were so many good first and second round offensive linemen. Might be a little thin at that position this year.
Yeah, I definitely think at least with the top of the class, I'm a little underwhelmed by what that profile looks like. I think there is some interesting day two types that are a little bit more scheme specific type of players, but I would definitely say the offensive line group this year is not going to be one of the hallmark positions in this class. I actually think there's the potential to be a lot of depth with the safety class this year. It feels like there's a lot of players that are exciting at that spot. Obviously that's headlined by Malachi Starks. Kevin Winston from Penn State is a couple of guys that are considered potential top 30 type of talents. There's a whole other positional value debate to be had there. I think this wide receiver class has a couple of names in the top. I'd be surprised if you saw big time numbers through the rest of the first round, but you see a lot of day two success at wide receiver. And I think this is another year in which you're going to have a lot of candidates that, depending on if you need a slot guy or a vertical playing guy or a guy that you can isolate and play through contact, like there's going to be a lot of options for all those kinds of players. And I think that's a spot that has good day two depth. I'd shout out as well.
Every year with the receiver depth,
yeah.
You know, the NFL, plenty of 2 and 3 wide receiver options every single year now. Diet Dew from the Discord asked about two specific players: Maryland wide receiver Ty Felton, Michigan edge Josiah Stewart. I don't know how up to date the draft board is. You just updated it probably last week. 33rdteam.com. Ty Felton at 94 at the moment. Josiah Stewart unranked for you. Do you see either of those guys rising? Both having pretty big years so far statistically. Yeah,
I want to see a little bit more from Stewart in particular, who obviously had the big splash production at Coastal his freshman year, and then it kind of fell off, and now he's kind of reignited some of that enthusiasm around his game. So I just want to see how he finishes the year as Michigan really gets into the meat of their schedule before I buy back in too much for him. And Felton obviously has been one of the more productive wide receivers in the country and some really big games. And he's an ascender for me. He wasn't somebody that I had particularly high coming into the season, but he's definitely earned that top 100 status. And if that play continues, I think you see good ball skills. He attacks the ball pretty aggressively, and he's got some explosiveness to his game, and he can be physical with the ball in his hands. So it's just a matter of where that stacks up in a very crowded wide receiver room, I think, when it's all said and done.
All right, Kyle, this has been fun, man. Our NFL draft lead over here at the 33rd team. Again, you can check out his mock draft. You are knee deep into the Dolphins coverage and everything. Tell everybody where you can get all your work. Yeah, so I'm available on social media at Grinding the Tape. I'm the daily host of Locked On NFL Scouting with Joe Marino. We look at team building across the league. Locked On Dolphins for daily Dolphins content. The NFL draft lead here at the 33rd team, and we've just started the past couple of weeks finalizing some player reports now that we're deep enough into the season with some guys. You got some injuries, unfortunately, that have come through where you kind of anticipate some guys are going to be in the draft class and they're done playing. So we're really greasing the wheels on that kind of stuff. That's all going to be living there over there at the 3013.com too. All right, man. Much appreciated. We'll definitely get you back here as we get closer to draft time. And next week on this little weekly fall dive into the draft, believe we've got Dane Brugler from The Athletic. I think we're getting Dane on here. So feeling good about our first three guests here as we kick off a little bit of draft coverage here on Check the Mic. So thanks to everybody for tuning in. I'll see you again on Monday for the full Check the Mic Week 7 NFL review.